Welcome to Beyond the Label, a raw, real-life look at living with disabilities, presented by Century Martial Arts, the world leader in martial arts since 1976. CenturyMartialArts.com for everything that is martial arts. And now your host, Mike D. and JD.
Welcome to Beyond the Label. I'm Mike D.
And I'm JD.
Just for those who haven't heard the show before, Jason and I have been buddies since high school, and I don't usually mince words with him. Jason has cerebral palsy. He walks around with crutches, and people talk to him like this because they think a disability means that you're just...
Hey, that's actually the topic for today. It's perception.
Is it really?
Yes.
I didn't even know.
No, it is. It's perception, and
I told Jason not to tell me what the topics were going to be, but this is perfect because I've got an outsider's view on this, and you'll have an insider's view, right?
Right, and we just did some travel, and so I was able to see that firsthand, and realize that basically the perception of me is different than somebody in a chair. I bet you didn't know that perception sometimes can be based on where you're seated. So somebody in a chair, somebody's perception of them is different than somebody's perception of me on crutches.
Vice versa too, right?
Right.
The person in the chair is going to have a different perception of the world than the person who's standing in crutches.
Right.
If you think back, let's take a non-disabled example, right? If you think back to when you were a kid and the world seemed bigger, and that's because it was, right?
Right.
When you were a kid, everything was smaller and taller than you. And think about that from both sides of the spectrum here, right? My side of the spectrum is, like you said, I may have a different level of conversation with you than a different level of conversation with someone sitting in a chair, not because I want to have that different perception, but just because I do.
No, it just kind of happens. And so I think the best way to get into this is to let you know how I came up with the topic. Because you always say, yeah, we'll get together and record the podcast and come up with the topic. And I'm like, what's going on in my life? And so I try to use that as...
So give us the example.
As a topic. So the example is, so we're doing some travel, right? And most of the time, as you know, I try to walk on the crutches and stay out of the wheeled assistive devices. But this particular... travel opportunity, I really needed the scooter, to use the scooter to get around.
Wait, you mean you didn't want to walk for miles and miles around these huge casinos in Vegas?
Well, I wanted to, but it's a little
difficult.
We'd still be there. So essentially what I had to do was I got a scooter, and so I'm using the scooter, and I'm like, no big deal, I'm just going to use the scooter and it'll be what it is. And we started to circulate around to these different booths, and kind of told them about the AMAA and what we were doing. And normally when I go to these, as I said, I'm on the crutches, and I started to notice that the respect that I received was based on my position in space, if you will.
So do you think, so I'm curious, do you think that's a physical height thing, or do you think that is related to the tool that you're using? I'm just curious.
No, I think it has to do with the height.
Okay.
But I also think it has to do with when somebody sees you with an assistive aid, such as a scooter or crutches, they automatically assume that your abilities are less than an able-bodied person, and take it one step further, that your cognitive abilities are less.
So can I focus on that for a minute? Because I have some real world experience in that, being an outside observer. So again, like I said, Jason and I grew up together. So I learned very, very quickly that Jason did not lack cognitive abilities. He just lacked some physical ability. So I grew up in the luxury, I would say, of understanding that people with disabilities, it's not a blanket situation, right? It doesn't mean because they have one disability, they have several. Now, in some cases that's true, right?
It is.
Let's extend the example. Some people, especially in Jason's situation, not only have physical disabilities that prevent them from moving well, but from speaking well, right? Or communicating well as well.
Right.
But the intelligence still exists at a level that I would venture to say is even higher than mine, right?
And you're a pretty smart guy. As much as I like,
I was trying to put myself down, but thanks, Jason. so not to dive too deep down this direction, as an outside observer, my frame, and I like to talk about frames in my world, my frame of reference, the direction in which I look at the picture from, is that level of understanding that someone who may not be able to speak well or move well still has a level of intelligence. But you definitely, as an outsider, can observe people almost, I don't want to say intentionally condescending, but it's almost like they talk down to you, not just on a physical level, right?
Right.
But they almost placate or soften or change the way they speak to you. Is that an accurate observation?
It is. And it like me as a person, it drives me up a wall. Like, it just, like, if there's nothing else that drives me up a wall, and you can see my body language right now.
Like, you're irritated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't do that to you. Why would you do that to me? And the thing that really smokes me is like, oh, I can't believe you were able to accomplish this. Like, in reference to our organization, like, oh, that's so amazing. I'm like,
it's amazing that you could build this. Like, well, why wouldn't I?
Right.
Right.
I'm like, right. And that attitude is exactly what we're trying to dispel here.
So to make a little bit of a joke, this is what my wife would make a comment about the fact that, well, that we get that all the time when we get mansplained, right? Like when women get mansplained too, right? And I actually have to agree with that. I've witnessed that happen, where women are talked down to just because they're women, because there's an assumed lack of intelligence, which irritates the crap out of me too. But so let's make that correlation. And this is topic one, man. We're in deep, and we're not even that far. But I'm the kind of guy that likes to solve a problem once it's found, right? I can't come to the table with just the problem. I need to come to the problem with the solution. So as we're thinking here, we'll come back to it, but I want to figure out how we can help educate people. But tell me a little bit more about what was going on at the trade show, and how, like, give me an example of how this actually played out.
Okay, so I know that's what I'm up against, and I guess,
so you're used to it.
Well, yeah, but I guess the thing was like, what's amazing about this experience is that I learned something that I didn't even know as a disabled person.
What did you learn?
Well, I just learned that the level of respect that I get standing on the crutches. I don't want to say level of respect, because it's not really level of...
The interaction is different.
Right. And it's different if I'm in a chair. I mean, I would have thought it would have been the same.
Right.
And it really wasn't. So when I'm on my crutches, although somebody will have a conversation with an able-bodied person first, it seems, when I'm in the scooter, I was at a real disadvantage, because it's almost like you didn't even exist. Oh, I didn't see you over there in the corner. You know what I mean?
That's terrible.
Like,
I laugh because it's in my head. I'm envisioning a situation, right, where you're sitting behind a desk, just in a regular chair, arms on the table, and someone comes up and starts talking to you.
Now that would be fine.
No one would know.
Right.
No one would know the difference, right? Until they spent a few minutes, and then they would realize that your hands move a little bit differently, and you've got a deeper tone of voice, and maybe they start to put something together.
Right.
But that beginning of that conversation, they would be treating you like they would treat anyone else that they were having an introductory conversation with, right?
Absolutely.
And then, so even from there, the difference between that and moving to your crutches, you're going to get a different level of treatment. Would you say you experience a different level of treatment?
Absolutely. And I think as that conversation, that example that you just put together, as that goes along and they figure it out, they change the conversation to a lower intelligence level almost. And it's not even, they don't do it on purpose. It's like subliminally, you know?
Yeah. No. And again, I think before the podcast is over, we'll define the true problem statement in this, right? And a good step to resolve the problem. But there are things that we inherently learn from the time we're younger. And when I say we, I mean, people without maybe physical disabilities.
Right. As a society.
I'm not part of a family where like your brothers and your family grew up differently than I did, because I didn't grow up with your family and learn who you were through that methodology. So until I had met you, I had a perception, and I had a perception that was based in some prejudice from other people. It was based in some information that I had learned only through circumstances, right? So to give specific examples, if I was sitting in a classroom and they wheeled someone in a wheelchair and that particular person couldn't communicate, maybe they were drooling on themselves, they didn't have their own mobility, they weren't in control of their own body. That was maybe my first experience with a disabled person growing up. And then maybe my second experience with a disabled person was slightly different than that. Maybe on a slightly better scale where they could move a little bit, but communication was still bad. And it's very interesting. Whether that affected me in a good way or a bad way doesn't matter. That's how I learned, because there was no quote unquote, you can't see me with my air quotes, but there's no quote unquote reason for anyone to teach me otherwise. Right?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. You might have to explain how you felt when we first met, but I think by the time I met you, I had learned that situation isn't necessarily consistent over time.
Well, it's weird for me because when I start a conversation, I don't even think about it. I'm just,
of course not.
It's a conversation. It's a normal conversation. And the way I usually figure out if somebody's comfortable with me is the minute that they forget to give, they're helping me down the stairs or wherever, and they forget to give me my crutches back. I'm like, dude, if you want to move any further past this point, I'm going to need those back.
I am sure that has happened with us many times.
But it's one of, and then that they're seeing you for you and not the device.
Right, because we were just in the middle of a conversation.
Right.
And we've gone over the example. So let's recap a little. In situations where a person who doesn't necessarily have experience with those who've been disabled before is talking to or communicating with that individual, you can definitely see a difference between the knowing of the disability, right, or versus the unknowing, and then the level of the disability versus maybe physical position or the way that you carry yourself or the way that you're communicating. Would that be an accurate breakdown?
Absolutely. And again, perspective is perception.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So on that note, let's talk about our sponsor for a minute. Century's been working with you over the years, right? Like you've had, interactions with the leadership at Century to help, look at what they're doing to develop tools for people with disabilities to work in the martial arts space.
Yeah. When I started the organization back in 2011, I was told that I had to find major support. So I opened the Century catalog, and Bill Wallace was the spokesman for them at the time for the Versa Stretch or something like that. And I'm a pretty straightforward guy, so I did some research, called him up and said, is this Mr. Bill Wallace's office? He said, office, it's Bill, what do you need? And I explained to him what I wanted to do, and he said, you call my buddies over at Century and they'll help you out. And we started working with him, and the relationship has grown from there.
Perfect. And the reason I brought that up, right, is because the leadership from Century has always treated you just like a person, right?
Yeah. And they've treated me not only like a person, but like a business equal, I guess you would say, for lack of a better word.
Regardless of the disabilities that you have.
Right.
And I want to call that out, right? And because we're talking about the perception and the perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an organization that has historically worked from the perspective of very able-bodied human beings. Their entire business model is to provide equipment for people that interact on a physical level.
They're the world's leader in martial arts supplies.
Right. So here you are, someone completely different in their space, and yet that perspective didn't necessarily that perspective that they had because of their perception wasn't necessarily different. And that's actually pretty admirable. And that's where I think we want to get everybody to, right? So the idea here is, how do we educate our friends, our family, whoever it happens to be, on the best way to interact with someone with a disability, or to treat someone with a disability, or to teach someone with a disability? And that's part of what AMAA does, right? Is the whole, how do we teach people with disabilities how to do martial arts?
Absolutely.
But in the podcast, we don't necessarily focus on that piece. What we're focusing on here today is, okay, so now I'm the human being that's interacting with you, the human being. And how do I, even though there's crutches on your arms or you're sitting in the scooter or a wheelchair, how do I take that maybe predefined background subconscious prejudice and do away with it so that I'm treating you with the same level of respect I treat anyone else?
Well, Mike, it's really not rocket science. I'll give you my opinion on it after this.
Beyond the Label, presented by Century Martial Arts for everything that is martial arts. It's no secret, every martial artist, no matter their age, dreams of becoming a legend. A legend. Having their name listed among the greats like Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, and Jackie Chan. You can hide it or deny it, but you know it's true. Being a legend takes raw talent, dedication, big breaks, and an ability to survive a roller coaster called fame. But it also takes one more thing to go with it. The best gear and equipment in the world from the company that is martial arts, Century Martial Arts. They aren't just another martial arts supplier that's never set foot on a mat. They are martial artists, and that means they know their products and use what they sell. From uniforms and training gear to weapons and equipment, Century has it all for every martial arts style. Although you may never be listed among the greats, you can still shop like one at CenturyMartialArts.com and unleash your legend within. Century Martial Arts, the world leader in martial arts since 1976. You're listening to Beyond the Label, a raw, real-life look at living with disabilities, presented by Century Martial Arts. Check them out at CenturyMartialArts.com. Now back to the show with Mike D and JD.
Hey, I'm JD.
I'm Mike D.
And welcome back to the podcast. Hey, Mike, why don't you take a minute and catch everybody up? Let them know what we're talking about today.
What we're focusing on here today is perspective and perception. Okay, so now I'm the human being that's interacting with you, the human being. And how do I, even though there's crutches on your arms or you're sitting in the scooter or a wheelchair, how do I take that maybe predefined background subconscious prejudice and do away with it so that I'm treating you with the same level of respect I treat anyone else?
It sounds pretty simple to me. Maybe it's more complex.
No, I think it's simple too, but
and maybe you're looking for the grand aha answer, but I don't have it. The only thing I can do is tell you and tell folks, take an extra minute and just kind of take it in and then say, okay, well, if this was my best friend and he wasn't using those assistive devices, what would the conversation be?
I think that's a really fantastic perspective. I do want to approach this from both sides of the coin, right? How do I react, right? As someone who doesn't need those assistive devices to talk to you, who does, and how do you react in the situation that I'm not reacting appropriately, right? Because I do want to look at it from both sides of the coin,
right?
So let's talk first. Because I'm selfish from my perspective. No, I'm kidding. But from my perspective. So you kind of called it out. How would I talk to my best friend? I think self-awareness, not necessarily general awareness.
Now, when I say your best friend, I mean your best friend in an able-bodied situation.
Oh, you mean you? Oh, sorry.
Right.
I'm kidding. But yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Just I think that the correlation here Jason's trying to make is he's not trying to say that somebody with a disability can't be a best friend. I think his point is there's enough people, we hope, listening to this podcast that don't have a lot of friends in their life with disabilities that might realize that that's a gap for them.
Right. If you think that you're the only ones that do that, like...
No, you're not.
I do that too.
Of course.
I am deathly afraid of other people with disabilities, believe it or not, right? And through my work here with the AMAA, I've gotten more comfortable and I'm better at it, but some stuff just scares me. I'm like, oh my God, how do I handle this? So I guess what I'm saying is it's okay to be afraid of it, but it's not okay not to get educated about it. And that's what we're trying to do here. You're like, oh, you're the dude with a disability, so you should feel different about that. No, I have those same issues too, and I guess that I was reminded of it too.
You were reminded of it at 40-something years old.
Right.
While you're in an area where people who you've talked to before may be interacting with you at that slightly different level now because you're not in the crutches anymore. Now you're sitting in the scooter. So, okay, so here's what it comes down to. In everything that we're saying, it really breaks down to this. It's self-awareness, not necessarily awareness of who you're talking to, right? Or what their disability is, because that doesn't matter. It does not matter that Jason has CP for my conversation with Jason, right?
Right.
It does not matter to me. What matters is that I'm aware of what's going on in my brain. Oh, yes, I just noticed that I have a certain tone of voice with this person that I shouldn't, right? I'm aware that I don't talk to other people like this, right? I don't talk to, my wife who doesn't walk around with crutches like this because she doesn't walk around with crutches. So why would I talk to someone else this way? And I think that self-awareness, it's the same thing I try to teach my kids. That self-awareness is important. So if I'm aware of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, then I can adjust my behavior, right? So you just said it. So from your perspective, you've in the past had the situation where even though you have some disabilities, you've approached other people with disabilities from a standpoint of fear or worry or concern of how do you interact in that situation. That was your frame of reference, right?
Right.
So now that you have, and I'm going to ask a question here, now that you have that self-awareness that happens, what's your frame of reference now when you approach that situation?
I just take each situation for its own and just kind of say, all right, I got a little bit of sticker shock here, if you will. And I just take a minute to absorb it in, take a breath and say, okay. And I ask the questions I need to know that pertain to the situation. So
I want to clarify for our listeners here, there's two different things that you're saying, right? One thing is you are aware of the situation. You're going to try to talk to this person. And then the second piece is, and then that's the same thing. That's the same thing that we all do when we go through any new interaction with any new person, right? We're always approaching like, okay, I need to, some people have anxiety over just talking to someone new. Doesn't matter whether they have a disability or not, right?
No, that's my wife is very much that way. And then once she meets them and is comfortable, it's
so that's step one. And then step two here, which is the other piece, which we don't need to dive into today, and we should have a podcast on this, is how do I properly interact with this individual? And I don't mean that from a they have a disability standpoint, so I need to treat them differently. It's from a what's the best way. So I don't want to interact with a deaf person by yelling at them because they're still not going to hear me, right? I don't want to interact with someone like, actually, I'll give you a Jason example. I usually pat people on the back. When I pat Jason on the back, he jumps about 5 feet, right? Because just his muscle tension, like in the shock of that interaction,
it's just
right? It's the reaction.
Heightened sense of startle reflex.
So it's not necessarily how I don't want to talk to Jason. Jason, how are you feeling? Like I don't want to do that. What I want to do is appropriately interact with that person based on what their needs are. So those are two different things. That second piece, that appropriate interaction, that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is making sure that we're not applying our prejudice to our interactions, right?
Right.
And that's part of that perspective and perception. So we've talked about how I do it from my perspective, right? From my perspective as the 6'2", standing on both my legs with no assistive devices, human being approaching someone else that may be in a different situation. I need to look at it from my standpoint and from my, my self-awareness and say, I don't need to treat Jason or anyone else any different for that matter. Right.
Right. And you don't need to go overboard with your adjustments either.
No, I just treat you like I would anyone else.
But, it would be nice maybe if you're 6 foot and I'm in a wheelchair, maybe pull up a chair and just.
Got it. Versus kneel down beside you, which is even different too, right? There's something else about that. So now let's talk about this from your perspective, right? And your perception. So here's someone that's treating you differently because of your assistive device, right? They're talking to you differently. There may be some condescension or childlike vocabulary in their voice. What's your reaction in that situation?
So it depends. It depends if I want to have fun with it or if it's a serious conversation.
Okay, so let's start with the serious conversation.
I guess. I just try to get my point across and get what I need to have done, and I hope by the end of it they realize I hope that it fades by itself.
So let me try to break this down. Your reaction is to deal with the situation as is and communicate with that person on your level, and hopefully they'll adjust.
Right.
Okay. So is there a reason that you don't address that directly?
Because most of the time I think they're already feeling uncomfortable, and that may be why they're acting that way. And so I feel like maybe if I was to call that out, it would only make the situation worse.
So that's huge. That self-awareness, the awareness that you have of that, or the situational awareness, is extremely good in that situation. I don't necessarily think that that's always the best answer, right? Some people, might need, to be woken up a little bit, but to be woke, as my kids would say. But, I appreciate that you're taking that, even though you're the one that's being approached in an, I would say, slightly inappropriate manner, you're taking that other person's feelings into consideration in your approach.
Well, and I feel like it's my job as a disabled individual, if you will, to educate somebody and break down those stereotypes. And so I feel like it's almost my job to do that.
I think that's really admirable. So now let's continue. I think, people want to know. So when you talk about the funny side of it, tell me about that.
Oh, I mean, if I see that it's not having any effect, or I just get that this person's just not going to get it, then I'm like, okay, well, if you think that's what I am, then that's what I'll be. You know what I mean? And I just kind of give them the answers that they're looking for based on that. And is it right? No. I mean,
but it's fun.
You shouldn't. Yeah, right. And so
here I am thinking you're an admirable human being, and in reality, you're just a horrible, horrible person.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sometimes you just gotta be.
Now, at least you give them the chance first.
It's just some people you just realize they're not gonna get it. If I'm doing all that to make them feel comfortable and they're still not, that's not my problem. I tried, and they're the ones with a far bigger problem than I'll ever have.
So let's kind of wrap this up, because I'm all about the problem statement and then the solution to the problem, right? So the problem statement here, the problem is our ability to communicate, and this goes far beyond disabilities, right? But our ability to communicate is restricted by the perceptions that we have. Or maybe a better way to say that is our ability to communicate is dictated by the perceptions that we have, right? And those preconceived notions and I don't remember how you said it, but the perspectives, there we go. The perspectives that we've grown up with on people that we're interacting with. And whether that's, mansplaining to your wife, or, talking down to someone who is physically sitting on a lower level because of their assistive devices. So that's the problem, right? Would you agree that that's our challenge?
Right. Yes.
So now what's the solution? And I mean, we've said it a couple times, but I think it's probably somewhere along the tune of being aware of what we're doing. I mean, do you have a different perspective on that?
I think it's education and keeping an open mind.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to ask questions that you want answers to, like, oh, so you have XYZ? Well, what does that mean? I mean, obviously you're not going to do that in an introductory conversation, but as you build a relationship, ask the questions. If you want to know, 9 times out of 10, if it's presented correctly, somebody with a disability is not gonna be offended or upset by it.
Great. That's good to know. So one more question. And I don't want to put the onus on your shoulders, but I'm wondering, for someone like me who approaches a new situation like that, is there an icebreaker that can kind of clear the air? Is there a way that I can understand, kind of back to your other topic, the best way to interact with you? I mean, like, listen, I know that the best way to interact with Jason is to interact with Jason, right? And not to tap you on the back. It's just flying to the moon. But is there a way to say, look, my disability doesn't define me, and you can talk to me like a normal human being?
That's it. You said it right there.
Yeah. And if someone said that to me, I don't think I would get offended, but then again, who knows, right? So this is a touchy topic. This is an interesting one to ponder. I don't think we have all the answers, but it's a good one to bring up and discuss. for sure.
Yeah, and it was the reason for bringing up the topic was, again, like you said,
Your experience, yeah.
Yeah, to let people know that I'm no better than you, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
And I'm no better than you, for sure. There's a lot I need to work on.
So, and I think that is a lot of the hang up for people is like, oh, if I don't approach this the right way, there is no right or wrong way to approach it. And we as folks with disabilities, we make the same mistakes as you. So at the end of the day, we're all just human, and just treat each and every person like that.
Like that. I appreciate that. Well, folks, you have spent another 30 some odd minutes listening to us ramble again, and we appreciate it. The purpose of this podcast, obviously, if you haven't figured out, is awareness.
Eventually here, we'll be able to get some other professionals in here that can give you real answers. But for now, this is the best we got.
It is the best you get. No, we definitely will. That's on the docket, and coming up, over the next, several episodes or so, we're going to bring in additional individuals because we know that you don't want to just listen to us talk. So thanks again for joining. I am Mike D.
I'm JD. And until next time,
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Label. If you would like to be a guest on an upcoming episode, email contact@adaptivemartialarts.org. Beyond the Label is produced by JD Production and presented by Century Martial Arts, the world leader in martial arts since 1976. CenturyMartialArts.com for everything that is martial arts.